Hello, buddy. All right, so welcome to the Mikestand. Of course, today is, of course, Monday, November the 10th, 2025. So, of course, we're a day away from Veterans Day and a couple of weeks away from Thanksgiving. Um, we're going to give people a chance to come in before we get started. Friendly reminder to everybody, of course, if you haven't already, if you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get um, some more people, some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. With that being said, here. All right. All right. Well, anyways, found out something pretty interesting earlier. Um, I was watching, of course, some cartoons, this afternoon. Um, and I was watching some cartoons this afternoon, of course. I came across some interesting notes. First off, of course, Ace in the Hole um, was the first cartoon in which Kent Rogers started doing the voice of Woody Woodpecker. Um, also, it was also one that was, you know, it was actually one of the first cartoons where they really started looking at the influence that like comics and cartoons um, has on whether or not this happened more like in the 50s. After Frederick Worthen, there was another psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Roberta Siegel who sat there and did try to do a study on whether or not watching the cartoons would lead kids to engage in more violent behavior. Um, and they had actually noted that Ace in the Hole, which was the fifth Woody Woodpecker cartoon, um, was saying that was one of the more violent cartoons that they were noticing. Now I watched it, and I didn't think it was that. I didn't think it was as violent as they want to make it sound. There's a lot more comic violence, yeah, but I don't think there was any like maliciousness or anything like that. You know. But anyways, hmm. Yeah. So anyway, so now we are getting close to the 5 minute mark. So I guess I should talk about what's on tap for tonight. So we're gonna go over one article from Bleeding Fool. It's in regards to an opinion piece by Avi Green, of course. Avengers Disassembled was the beginning of the end of classic Marvel. So after we get through that article, of course, and we'll get all caught up on the latest in terms of pro wrestling, get caught up on, of course, this past weekend's, SmackDown and Collision, talking quite a bit about a situation that happened during the Collision taping that that got talked about quite a bit. Then from there, we'll of course wrap things up with this day in each history. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into and of course we're also going to talk a little bit about this upcoming weekend's I think it's Turning Point pay-per-view from TNA. So we'll get a look at that. I admit I haven't been following I just figured TNA wasn't really doing a whole lot of build for it. So, but anyways, so let's go ahead and get into it then here. Alrighty then. Alright, so Avengers Disassembled was the beginning of the end for Classic Marvel. Article by Avi Green published today. So let's get into this then. Popverse wrote a brief, sugar-coated item about how the overrated Brian Michael Bendis got the assignment to write Avengers Disassembled, which is being alluded to as part of Marvel's next crossover to avoid. And then this from the article that he's referencing here. The mention of Avengers Disassembled in the announcement of the 2026 Marvel Comics storyline Armageddon is something that might worry fans of certain superheroes, given the death toll of that earlier 2004 storyline. Turns out that killing off so many heroes and so many high-profile Marvel characters at that wasn't necessarily writer Brian Michael Bendis' original plan. And this is Avi's response to what we just read. Unfortunately, that he went along with everything as planned, entirely unquestioned, speaks volumes as to how much value he really placed on any of the characters who were the subject to such loathsome abuse. And if you haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the screen, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So with that being said, let's go ahead and continue with the article here. All right, so let's see. For those who weren't reading comics in 2004, Avengers Disassembled was a 4-part storyline in which the Avengers have what Bendis described as, quote, the worst day in Avengers history, unquote. A day that results in the destruction of longtime headquarters Avengers Mansion, the death of members Jack of Hearts, Ant-Man, the Vision, and Hawkeye, and the discovery that the Scarlet Witch's mental instability led to her making all of this happen. In parentheses here, albeit unknowingly. The storyline ends with the team disbanding. Don't worry, a new Avengers formed a couple of months later in a comic book series sensibly titled The New Avengers. In fact, the New Avengers had been the point all along, with Avengers Disassembled created as a bridge between the Avengers of old and the new all-star team that included Spider-Man, Wolverine, and other best-selling characters intended to raise the profile of the team. The storyline was pulled together quickly and intended to have a big impact to get fans' attention. But even the writer of the comic was surprised by how far Marvel was willing to go to make that happen. And his obvious response to what we just read, I think it was established 8 years later that Doctor Doom may have been behind Wanda's neo-insanity. But it was 8 years too late, and look how the columnist has no complaints over how Spidey and Wolvie were chosen in such a way as to symbolize that the new team was comprised of members who weren't exactly the kind intended for combating the most larger than life villains the Avengers could face in the past. The worst is that these were hilariously cheap selections, shoehorned into Avengers at the expense of established members, Scarlet Witch included. There were stories in the past where Spidey came to the aid of characters like Scarlet Witch, and to think that here, instead of teaming them together in the same group, they wanted to kick Wanda to the curb for Spidey and Wolvie's sake. Yeah, sometimes overhauling a group, sometimes it can have benefits, but other times depending upon where you want to go with it, right? That's kind of the sometimes when you're trying to reboot an entire continuity, sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can't. So and again, if you guys haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. I'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So, anyways, getting back to the article here, what they say about Marvel seeking so I guess this is obvious speaking now. What they say about Marvel seeking attention at all cost was also what led to the even more offensive identity crisis at DC, and nobody complains about how common sense was sacrificed for the sake of script writing that was offensive to women. Nor are any questions asked as to whether it was appropriate to alienate longtime fans, not to mention people who find misogyny repellent. It's all absolutely disgusting, and both Marvel and DC have suffered from it since. Now, here's a part where Bendis indicates he never had any qualms about killing any characters the editors would greenlight for the grave. And now we're going to get, I guess, a direct quote from Brian Michael Bendis here in regards to what he wrote. Quote, I was sitting there cooking my moments, and instead of pitching a bunch of deaths, I go, in smaller quotes here, can I have a list, in brackets, of characters I can kill? Unbracketed and unsmaller quoted. And they came back to me with a list that shocked the bleep out of me. I would never have asked for the Vision, Hawkeye. For the Vision, Hawkeye shocked me. Unquote. Bendis revealed in SKTCHD's 2024 oral history of Avengers Disassembled. Quote, these were not asked, they were offers. Unquote. At the quote, there wasn't any debate over, in brackets, killing Ant-Man or Jack of Hearts. Any of those guys for the most part. Even the Vision, they're not going to be in the new book. They have to go somewhere, unquote, added editor Tom Brevoort. quote, so the place that they're going is Potter's Field. And that means it's explosive. Not to be gauche about it, but obviously death in comics sells. I'm going to wonder what Avi's going to say about that. People turn up when superheroes go belly up, and so the idea that they kill off a bunch of these characters was exciting. Yeah, I don't know if killing off characters is really as much of a moneymaker as they want to try to make it sound like. But there are probably some comic creators in here somewhere in the chat that probably could tell me just how much of that really is true. If death in comics increase sales. As a way of grabbing attention, it worked. Disassembled, this is still from the article, Disassembled was the start of a significant sales renaissance for the Avengers as a franchise, catapulting the team back into the collective attention of fandom in a way it hadn't been in decades. All of which should make fans of current day Marvel superheroes a little bit nervous, especially given that there's now a MacGuffin in the Marvel Universe to create new versions of old heroes pretty easily. And this is Avi's response to what we just read. This is head-shakingly stupid, too, mainly because no sales figures are presented. And this is always something that Avi always points out. When they make these claims, right, they don't really put up any numbers to justify their claim. They don't put up any evidence to justify their claim. They just say, "Yo, this is what is. Now just take it at face value." And most people won't. And to sell comics based on characters getting slaughtered is horrific and offensive. But do these overrated writers care? Even now, when what's alleged has mostly waned, mainly because the audiences were driven away, it's unlikely they'll ever admit death for the sake of it is repellent. Unfortunately, the seeds of this mentality were laid out long ago with Gwen Stacy's death in the hands of Green Goblin, one of the beginners, and DC's killing off Supergirl, no matter how heroically she was portrayed in Crisis on Infinite Earths, notwithstanding another horrid prominent example, all because the writers either don't know what to do with the characters, or they believe everybody's that fine with casually killing off characters, and never cared about the design targets in the first place. Or worse, because they believe the audience is all that desensitized to violence. I've had the feeling DC's management was even more lacking in confidence in the past decades, and it got worse when Identity Crisis came about, minimizing serious issues like SA, and as it did during the same year Disassembled came out. Which is true because there was in Identity Crisis there was some pretty gnarly stuff that happened in Identity Crisis. I think it was like the story where Dr. Light had found out the Justice Leaguers' secret identities. I think he basically arped Jean Loring and drove her insane from that experience. So anyways, as we continue on here, I looked at what's available from SKTCHD's interview from last year, and a problem with their modus operandi, I guess, is that they employ a paywall for a lot of articles. So I can't tell if anything was brought up about Scarlet Witch, but I wouldn't be shocked if anything that does come up is pretty sleazy. For now, I guess I'll highlight some of the examples of what is available, and they do offer a surprisingly large amount. Regardless, that's quite sugar-coated, to say nothing short of disgusting. For example, one of the most notable examples of this form of this from the history of superhero comics was published 20 years ago. It was a 4-issue storyline that featured everything you could imagine from this type of tale. An endless onslaught of villains, a million guest stars, the destruction of an iconic location, character deaths, a long-standing hero breaking bad, you name it. This comic had it. More than that, it led to a complete status quo change for the franchise that belonged to helping turn what was already a big moment into something more. I guess this is the article that he's referencing here. While it was polarizing upon its release, in brackets personal take, I find it to be an exciting superhero blockbuster, unbracketed. That's, I guess, the writer of the article's opinion there. It led to one of the most creatively fertile and commercially successful periods the franchise has ever seen, starting with Bendis and Finch's New Avengers #1, that came in its wake. More than that, it was the beginning of one of the most prolific partnerships in Marvel's modern era, with Bendis and editor Tom Brevoort's collaboration helping define an uncommonly strong period for the publisher. I'm going to go off camera here for a moment. I'll be right back. Just got to step away from the camera for a moment, but I will put on some music while I'm gone. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Let's get back to the article here. Whatever your opinion of it is, Avengers Disassembled was a massive story. The events that transpired in its phases, in the conversation surrounding it, and the impact it had down the line, and with its 20th anniversary, in brackets Avengers number 500, kicked off the storyline with an issue that arrived on July 28, 2004, unbracketed, and another of those moments of transition nearly upon us, in bracketed, one that even shares a key player from this story in Brevoort, unbracketed. It felt like the right time to revisit Avengers Disassembled, how it came to be. I guess this is now we're getting into Avi's response to what we just read. No matter what the interviewer says, this is insulting the fandom and perpetuates examples of apologia. They're prevalent from then till now. That are prevalent from then till now. I'm not buying the notion the interviewer is actually an Avengers fan, an X-Men fan, or even a Spider-Man fan. There's no sales figures given here either, and worse is how the interviewer dismisses any questions of merit and morality for the sake of selling at all costs. Something that continues to this day, and nobody's willing to admit, sales are dismal. Again, where does he get off lecturing us that Disassembled is quote-unquote massive and literally got everybody to buy it month after month simply because it killed characters and gave Wanda a fate worse than death? This is nothing more than tabloid. Now, granted, here's the thing with Avi, though. Avi is kind of doing the same thing that they're doing. He's making claims about, he's talking about how they're not providing the sales numbers. He's also not providing the sales numbers. So it's kind of a little like, I mean, if he's going to call them out for it, then maybe he should also, he should follow up his own statements with evidence and facts. Anyways, back to the article he's referencing here. Tom Brevoort, in parentheses here, editor of Avengers Disassembled and New Avengers, let's see. When we get to this period, in brackets here, this is around 2003, Avengers was not a top 10 seller, but it still sold respectively, and it still carried its weight as an upper mid-list title. It had good talent on it, and it was generally well regarded. It just wasn't as fresh and exciting as what was going on in the Ultimate line. Brian Michael Bendis, writer of, in parentheses, writer of Avengers Disassembled, and so I guess this is from an interview I guess they were doing, and New Avengers, in parentheses, the Avengers were doing absolutely fine. Brevoort, Jeff Johns, had signed an exclusive deal with DC, so we had to replace the writer on Avengers, and this was in the middle of the days when then Marvel president Bill Jemas was at his craziest. I needed to cast somebody that I could get Bill and, in parentheses here, and then Marvel editor-in-chief Joe, in parentheses Quesada, to approve. So we ended up with Chuck Austin. Austin's first issue was January 2004's Avengers number 77, and his run was troubled from the start. As Brevoort said, quote, almost every story he did wasn't really the story he originally pitched by the time it got to the page, unquote. The demands of leadership in Marvel's own universe resulted in necessary adjustments, something that made delivering a quality title a tricky proposition. They still had big plans, though, as Brevoort Austin and artist Oliver Coipel and Scott Collins knew they were on their way to a big anniversary issue in Avengers number 500, which was set to arrive later that year. The team was already well into plans for that and more. And that is Avi's response to what they just said there. And again, to both my Rumble and my YouTube viewers, if you guys haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. If this was supposed to be a justification for where they went with Bendis' story, it's just as reprehensible as what DC did to the second Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, during Emerald Twilight. Interesting how Brevoort uses the Ultimates, one of the crudest alternate world takes on a Marvel title, as an excuse for where they went with Bendis' shoddy story in Disassembled. How interesting, quote unquote, quality comes up here when the finished product was nothing of the sort, and no challenging queries are raised in that context. Yet, interestingly, they bring up Austin because he was the writer whom some PC advocates were only willing to admit was bad based on how leftist or not he didn't meet their standards. This also reminds me of when the disgraced Gerard Jones was writing Green Lantern during 1990-1993, and then simply because he screwed up horribly, that somehow justified Emerald Twilight. It sounds vaguely like the same thinking affected where things went with the Avengers 2. Back to the article now. Back to the article that Avi is referencing here. Amidst all this, Marvel was going through a bit of a transition as well. Its focus wasn't even on its original line of comics, but the Ultimate line, a parallel universe that had its own Avengers in Mark Millar and Brian Hitch's The Ultimates. Ultimate Marvel was a major point of emphasis for Jemas and Quesada, creating a situation where the classic Marvel Universe material wasn't well supported in the moment, according to Brevoort. That was the way things were. But shortly before this story truly begins, there was a change in leadership. Jemas was out, and Dan Buckley was in as a new publisher of Marvel. This was big for two reasons. One of which was Brevoort's own health. He had an, quote, incredibly contentious, unquote, relationship with Jemas. Brevoort. He and I did not see eye to eye and did not get along. My job was not fun at all, to the point I would be thinking to myself on a daily basis, quote, is today going to be the day that I'm just going to blow a gasket and keel over? Or is today going to be the day that I hurl him down an elevator? Whoa! Whoa, okay there, Tom. Maybe you ought to calm yourself down a little bit. Talking about heaving your boss down a flight of steps. Yeah, that's not going to go over too well. One of these two things is going to happen eventually. The other reason it was important that it created an opportunity for the original line of Marvel Comics to retake its place in the hierarchy, if only because of where Buckley's interest lied. Bendis. The Ultimate line took off in a way that was beyond what anyone was hoping for. Brevoort. Ultimate Universe was the new hotness for a couple of years. And here's Avi's response to what we just read. Gee, That hints it was wearing thin and turning stale sooner than expected. Mark Miller's take was shameful, right down to how he treated the alternate world Wasp. And to think they'd go the sleazy route to complete to compete with this book is atrocious, including how Tigra was treated. It's certainly surprising to learn Bravort wasn't comfy with Jameis. Yet, even after the latter left Marvel, any destructive approach Jameis put to use remained, and Bravort contributed to much of it over the years that followed, including how, by this time, a lot of stories he edited emphasized heroes fighting themselves, and when they turned to a storyboard meeting, they preceded the official writing. They say that, and this is back to the article he's referencing. Bravort. The conversation came around to Avengers, and it went hot and heavy fast. And the reason it was hot and heavy fast, as much as anything, was Mark and Brian were both there. Bendis. Mark and I both had strong takes on what team books are and what they should be. Bravort. What Mark said essentially was, quote, when I was a kid growing up, I would buy Justice League of America. The reason I would buy Justice League of America is I would get all the best superheroes in one story. Why is it that Avengers doesn't have all the best guys in it? It became the conversation that dominated the setup. Bendis. My bugaboo from when I was a kid was, quote, why aren't Spider-Man and Wolverine on the Avengers? Why aren't the Avengers the 6 coolest people in the Marvel Universe? Well, that's also Bendis' personal opinion that, now granted, I think there'd be a lot of people who would say that Spider-Man and Wolverine are probably among the coolest, among the 6 coolest in the Marvel Universe, but not everybody would agree with that opinion. Let's see now. All right. And here, too, is a serious flaw. So this is Avi responding to what we just read. Here, too, is a serious flaw. They're going according to whom they consider their quote-unquote favorites, in parentheses here, and considering where they went with Avengers, even that's questionable, unparenthesed, not by the entertainment value in the finished product, and most of the writers of the past century didn't cast new team members at the expense of the core members. So what's the point? I'm not surprised Millar had no issue with where they were going, since it's not like he was respecting the same characters in his own alternate dimension title. The discussion continues with the following. So this is now back to the article that Avi's referencing, of course. Let's see, Bravort. Most of my arguments about things like why Spider-Man Wolverine shouldn't be in the Avengers had less to do with the Avengers and more to do with Wolverine and Spider-Man. Part of the thing that makes Spider-Man work is he has problems balancing his superhero life and his real life, and those problems typically involve money woes. And this, of course, is something that Bravort really just pushed, and I know Avi's talked a lot about that too. It was Bravort's idea to split up Peter and Mary Jane too, from what I understand. Difficulties being in multiple places at the same time, and the impact that being a superhero has on his relationships. So many of those problems just go away if he's got the Avengers as his buddies. on speed dial. Let's see, Bendis. I remember the argument was, quote, Spider-Man is not an Avenger, unquote. That was the desk-pounding moment. And I was like, quote, yeah, that sounds like a good story about why Spider-Man's not an Avenger, or why Spider-Man is graduating to be an Avenger, unquote. It just sounded like a good story to me. That was my argument. And if it's only for a year and it didn't work, even that's interesting. Now, I know that Yellow Flash has talked about this a little bit before in regards to how they've treated Spider-Man, and with some of this, we covered some articles on it too. But I know one of the theories that's been put out there is that a lot of the current day writers, since they don't know what to actually do with Spider-Man to get his story to progress, they just keep regurgitating the same stuff, over and over again. They just keep rehashing the same old stories, and that's what's got a lot of people turning away from Marvel and DC. DC's doing it quite a bit too. But Braveheart says in response, by the end of the day, I walked out of that meeting being like, quote unquote, this again? Because I've been through things like this with Jameis a lot. I came out of that evening going, quote, I don't know what the bleep I'm going to do now. Another kick in the teeth, unquote. But after having the night to kind of settle myself, the thing that made, in parentheses, it better was, quote, okay, Mark is pitching this. Mark is going to write this book. I know Mark. I can work with Mark. It will be fine. I'll go in, and me and Millar, we'll be able to do this, and we'll figure it out, unquote. And now Avi's response to what we just read. Interesting how Millar's backing for the direction persuaded Braveheart to go along. Additionally, interesting how Mary Jane Watson isn't brought up. But then, if Axel Alonso was fine with one more day, it shouldn't be surprising if Braveheart was too. Some of his arguments, however, could just as easily be made about Iron Man and Thor as well, based on what relationships were to be seen in their solo titles. Putting Spidey in a team title isn't the problem. It's just how plausible it is, and isn't that the problem? There were times when Spidey appeared in Avengers, and that itself was okay. But it wasn't based on recognition, but how good a story could be built around him. The same could be said for Wolverine, based on whether a plausible scenario could be written up about whether Captain America approved of his clause, or if Black Knight was a member before Blades alone aren't member before. Blades alone aren't a problem. Just the writing merit or lack thereof. This is back to the article he's referencing. The promise of new Avengers was why Avengers Disassembled existed at all. It was the path to a new era for a new team. How Bendis got to this squad of A-listers was up to him and anyone else. What mattered most to the room was the destination. Everyone viewed it as one with great potential, even Braveheart. Braveheart. As much as I argued, and I certainly was defending my existing creative team, defending my ego and pride, I always knew New Avengers would work. If you put Spider-Man, Wolverine, and big characters in Avengers, that's going to work. It was less about that and more about, quote, you're trashing this thing that I've just been building with this other team, and we're treating them not terribly well, unquote. That as much as anything was the concern. Let's see. We're almost done. Anyway, I do need to go off camera here for a quick moment, so I'll be right back as soon as, of course, as I make the judgment. I'm gonna put some music on while I'm going. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. So let's go ahead and try to get through this. There's this article here. All right, so, and here's where Braveheart contradicts any previous argument that he may have had that he didn't think it a good idea to put Spidey and Wolvie in the Avengers. Yet how hilarious he claims he'd worried they were deconstructing what he'd built up with previous writers, because on the one hand, he went along with Bendis' cheap vision, and on the other, the writing turned out by the aforementioned Johns was awful, as well as Austin's. Kurt Busiek's Avengers run was the last palatable run on the series to date. And it's a shame he's such a leftist wokester. That said, I will say that if Braveheart and company deconstructed the best parts of Busiek's run, that's why it's such a sad affair. This is about what I could get from what the site didn't put behind a paywall. But one more thing I will add here is what a commenter replied. Back to the article there. I can say without hesitation that I was one of the readers disassembled drove away. It remains, in parentheses, and will remain, a gap in my collection and mind, along with everything else Bendis ever wrote for the Avengers. I appreciate that he and Tom can look back at the warts, in parentheses, some of them, but not enough was made of how odious Bendis was online, including a CBR interview I can unfortunately no longer find, where he said that longtime readers were just mad that he wasn't doing quote-unquote Roy Thomas type stories, and that he could write you, quote, as Roy Thomasy of a story as you want, unquote. I've never forgotten that. Bendis is no Thomas. So this is an obvious response to what we just read there. Nor did he ever turn out a good story as good as what Thomas did. Though, if there's a shortcoming Thomas writing may have had, it's that he wasn't all that different from some other writers of the times who chose to pair up superheroes and superheroines with each other rather than developing civilian co-stars. Who could be paired up with the costumed characters. Now that I think of it, did Scarlet Witch ever have a civilian boyfriend? I do own a lot of Avengers stories in Epic Collection archives now, so I'll have to find the time to read as many of those as possible to make sure I know the exact answer. But if Wanda was never paired up with a mortal man on a long or short basis, that's got to be saying something. Anyway, it's sad, but no surprise, how these apologists for Marvel and DC continue to fluff coat their worst output since the turn of the century. And with people like them still running the department store, that's why even the Avengers will never recover, nor will the team titles see any talented writing. All right, so we're done with that now. With that article. So now, of course, we're going to move on to the wrestling wrap up here. Actually, I'm going to go off camera one more time here. I'll be right back. All right, so let's get into the wrestling wrap up here. Take a look back over this weekend's events, as well as look into tonight's Monday Night Raw. So first, I'm going to head back to Friday Night SmackDown, as of course they started their build toward Survivor Series. Was actually reported that Drew McIntyre was suspended. This is done to cover up the fact that he would be going off to shoot a movie for the next, I guess, few weeks. So now with that being said, let's go ahead and go back to this past Friday Night SmackDown. And apparently it wasn't really received all that well. Cage match. But the opening match of the evening saw in an open challenge match for the United States title, Ilya Dragunov retain the title over Johnny Gargano with Candice LeRae. And I guess their DIY taking a break from the tag division, focusing on some singles goal here. In the second match of the evening, Nia Jax defeated Charlotte Flair, getting some help from from newly promoted NXT star, now being an official part of the SmackDown brand, Lash Legend, as it looks that going to be building towards having a team of Lash and Nia going after the women's tag titles against Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair. Of course, that's also in conjunction with the Raw team of the Kabuki Warriors of Asuka and Kairi Sane, also going after the titles as of course they posing as medical staff ambushed Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss, and then laughed about it. And then Chelsea Green came back to become, for the second time, the United States Women's Champion, as she defeated Julia after basically a lot of bad booking on Julia's for Julia's reign. Now they decided to put the title back on Chelsea Green, which of course is making her a double champion, as she and NXT North American champion Ethan Page are also the AAA Mixed Tag Champions. So stay tuned more for that. Tala Tonga with Solo Sikoa in his corner defeated Rey Fenix in a singles match. And then in the main event, a non-title match, Cody Rhodes would face off against Aleister Black, only for, as I understand it, Drew McIntyre and Damian Priest to get involved in that match, leading to, of course, Drew McIntyre's kayfabe suspension. So that's all that went down on this past Friday night SmackDown, as it was on USA Network from the Bon Secours Wellness Center in Greenville, South Carolina, with Michael Cole and Corey Graves on commentary. Now, with that being said, we're going to move ahead to Saturday. We're going to move ahead to Saturday to Collision, and we got to, we're going to go over the results, but also there's a big story that came out of that as well. We'll get to that in a moment here. So this past Saturday's Collision came from the Bayou Music Center in Houston, Texas. The opening match saw the Bang Bang Gang duo of Austin Gunn and Juice Robinson defeat FTR in a tag team match in 40 minutes, 17 seconds. Of course, Dax Harwood and Cash Wheeler with Stokely in their corner. In a match for the AEW TNT title, Kyle Fletcher successfully defended against the Bullet Club's Ace Austin. And then what was originally supposed to be TJ, Anna Jay, and Ty Mello, or Ty Conti, however you want to call her. Originally, it was supposed to be them against the team of Miranda Elise and Nixon Newell. Nixon Newell, the former Tegan Knox of WWE fame. Well, they walked out on the Newell and Elise walked out on the show. There was a lot of, and we'll talk about that in a moment here. But in the match that did happen, TJ defeated Heian and Maya World in just under 2 minutes, at minute 50. Now, the big story that came out of here was the fact that Elise and Newell walked out of the match. Now, AEW was trying to do Newell a favor because she hadn't been receiving a whole lot of bookings. So they were trying to bring her in. Now, supposedly, the initial reports were saying that Elise and Newell did not want to put over TJ. They did not want to take the loss. It wasn't taking the loss that was really the issue, as Newell herself would clarify. It wasn't taking the loss that was really the issue. It was the fact they wanted more time for the match. They were told to keep it under 3 minutes. They wanted more time for the match. And then we're told that the time had already been set and they could not make changes to it. And they said, okay, why don't you give some other people a chance to do this then? Because we don't want to do this, and apparently AEW seemed fine with that. And by the way, Tony Schiavone and Nigel McGuinness were on commentary for all this. So, but there was a lot of things said and done. Regardless of how you feel about how everybody handled it, right? Now, apparently, Nixon Newell has received some death threats over this, and that's just wrong. Whether or not you agree with what a person does, there's no excuse for that. All right. The fact what she was wanting them to have more time. She was advocating, and she thought that given more time, they could put on an even better match. But they'd already slated out the time for that. And it is kind of understandable from AEW's end, too, because they had some other big things going on, as we just mentioned, the TNT title match, but also the remaining matches to determine the advantage in this Wednesday's Blood and Guts match, which we'll get to now here. And match number 2 of the best of 3 series in the women's Blood and Guts advantage battle. Jamie Hayter defeated Sky Blue to tie that series up at 1 apiece. And then in the finals for the women's match, Tekla defeated Harley Count. So the team of Megan Bain, Mercedes Moné, I guess that was a 10-person team. Team of Megan Bain, let's see, the team of Megan Bain, Mercedes Moné, Athena, and the Triangle of Madness. Triangle of Madness of Tekla, Sky Blue, and Julia Hart got the advantage for this upcoming Wednesday's women's Blood and Guts match. And then the finals of the men's best of 3 series match came down to Roderick Strong defeating John Moxley by countout, in which the team of course, the conglomeration of Orange Cassidy, Tomohiro Ishii, I believe, Mark Briscoe, Kyle Riley, and Roderick Strong, and I don't remember all the rest of their team, they got the advantage for this Wednesday's Blood and Guts match. So that's all that happened there. Now, of course, this Saturday, I believe it's this Saturday, and I have to double check that here. But this Saturday, TNA will be doing TNA will, I believe, be having their next pay-per-view this Saturday. Let's see if I find it. And again, I don't know if there's been as much build for it as there should be, but let's see. So TNA, let's see, will be having their Turning Point pay-per-view from Winter Park, Florida, this Saturday, the 14th, on TNA Plus from Full Sail University. No matches for that show have been signed yet, so probably find out more as time goes along. But anyways, with that being said, now of course we'll move on to this day in each history. As soon as I pull that up, we got a couple of pieces here. 2010 and 1945. All right. So first off, on this date, 80 years ago today, so So now, with today being Monday, November the 10th, 2025, let's take a look back at this day in Nietzsche history. So, first up, on this date, 80 years ago today, 80 years ago on this date, Warner Brothers Hair Tonic would premiere on this date back in 1945, 80 years ago today. Warner Brothers Hair Tonic. Hair Tonic is a 1945 Warner Brothers cartoon in the Looney Tunes series, directed by Chuck Jones and written by Ted Pierce. Stars Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd, making this the second cartoon directed by Jones to co-star the two, the first being Elmer's pet, Rabbit. Voice characterizations are by Mel Blanc and Arthur Q. Bryan. So, 80 years ago today, Hair Tonic premiered on, was released to theaters on this date back in 1945. Now, moving ahead to the year 2010. This date in the year 2010. On this date in the year 2010, the 15th issue of Chew from Image went on sale on its date back in 2010, 15 years ago today. Sold for $2.99 with 32 pages. So with that, I thank everybody for being here tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. We'll be back here with more Niche News tomorrow. And this Sunday, I'll be joined by Rex Christian from Devil Flyer Momentum. We'll be taking another trip down Comics History Lane. So with that, I thank everybody for being here, and I hope to see everybody back here tomorrow. Bye.